11, and that was commanded by Neil Armstrong. So Neil, how much was everything in readiness for you to do your thing?
I have to tell you all that I was really surprised that we were going to get the opportunity to make the first landing attempt. The reason is, as you've heard, there's only Apollo 7, 8, 9, and 10. 4 flights. Now normally, let's say you get a new military aircraft that's coming into inventory and now it's going into operation. By the time the squadron pilot gets to fly that airplane, it's been through a pretty exhaustive test program. Not only checking out the stability control, handling qualities, and all the boundaries of the operating envelope, and sometimes weapon delivery, and lots of other things that have been checked out. And it takes them usually a couple of years and maybe 5 different airplanes and a couple hundred flights on each one before they get to that point. Well, we were in a big race, and we couldn't afford the luxury of all that testing. So, as you've heard, we had just 4 flights to get us ready to try the first landing. So I didn't really think the chances were very good that we would have a successful landing on the first flight. Jim had done his part, his flight. Obviously, Gene had painted that line. I never did climb that line.
But you found the moon.
And the other 2 flights similarly did a remarkable job of getting their part of the project done successfully, so that we got the attempt. The only thing that hadn't been done is that departing from the lunar orbit and going down to the surface, and of course coming up from the surface and rejoining and rendezvous. That part had not been. So we really focused on that part. It's very complex because unlike flying that we're used to doing here on Earth, we have altimeters, airspeed indicators, climb, all kinds of information, navigation stuff, and runways, and control towers, and control systems, all kinds of stuff to help you. You didn't have any of those things. We had to determine altitude on radar, and then to do that, you had to have the radar antenna pointed to the ground. But that wasn't good for all other things you had to do, so you couldn't get altitude all the time. You had to get airspeed, or there's no air, but you had to get velocity also from radar. We flew the trajectory from orbit down to the surface on a computer, an autopilot. Essentially had an autopilot down there. The computer program was very complex, and I thought there was every reason to believe that having all that stuff work the first time was kind of a long shot. So my own thinking was had about a 90% chance of getting back there safely with the landing attempt, but only an even money chance of making a successful landing on the first attempt. Our computer weighed about 70 pounds, and it didn't have 32 gigs. We had 32 megs, and 32K, and 2K of erasable. That was it, 70 pounds. No microcircuitry in that thing. It's a hand-woven wire core memory. Very primitive. And yet, it worked well. We never had a failure. In the middle of the trajectory, about halfway down, we got the computer said, alarm, alarm, 1202. I didn't know what 1202 meant. A lot of different ways to go wrong. And you know how computers are, they do. they say, I've got a problem, but it's not my fault.
By the way, everyone on the ground emission control says, what's 1202? No one else knew what it was either.
But they had some smart young guys down in Mission Control who quickly figured out that it was just a buffer overload and all the internal mechanisms were working fine and we could go on, and they gave us the clearance. But the autopilot was taking us into a region that didn't look very good. It was a gigantic crater. We called it West Crater. It was, the crater was about the size of a big sports stadium, outdoor sports stadium, the size of the crater. And the walls were very steep walls on the outside. And it was covered with rocks, big boulders, some about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. Didn't look, that slope and those rocks didn't look like the place I wanted to go. So I took over from the autopilot, flew it manually, just like a helicopter, out further to the west to get clear of that boulder field and those steep slopes that looked for a smooth, kind of level place without rocks to land. And found one. We had not much fuel left, and we finally touched down with probably about 20 seconds of fuel left. And but that was a moment of supreme satisfaction.
You said 20 seconds of fuel left, but how much fuel was that?
Well, I don't know the answer. I should know the answer, but I don't remember. But the tank was spherical, and when you get to a low level in a spherical bottom, it's very hard to measure just how much, particularly when it's sloshing. And so I'm not sure anybody really knows exactly how much fuel was left,
But it sounds good, doesn't it?
yeah.
Who cares now?
But it was a great feeling to get on the surface, not just because the stuff had worked and we successfully landed, but because we had about between 300,000 and 400,000 people working for almost a decade of their lives, giving us the chance to make that landing, and it was a success for every one of those that was working on the job, and given their part of the project, that extra tender loving care that made sure that it was not only as good as the specifications said it should be, but it be a little bit better.
How much, all of us who either saw that and remember seeing it live when it was happening, and those who have seen the videos since, we think, wow, that moment when you stepped on the surface and said, that's one small step and so forth. What was more important to you, that or getting down? And when did you think up those things that you said that we've all heard all of our lives?
Well, the president's order to NASA was to land a man safely on the moon and return him safely to Earth. And he didn't say anything about walking, or that wasn't part of the deal. To us, the important thing was getting that machine on the ground safely in a position where we could launch from it and go back into orbit. That was the high point. And on getting down on the surface didn't seem like much of a big deal to us, because pilots like to make smooth landings, but getting down off the airplane's never much. I spent most of my time even before the flight, thinking about what could be said when we landed, which was the important thing. And so we came up with Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed, and that was thought out. But getting down, I didn't think about that. After all, I had even money chance of ever getting to that point. I didn't spend a lot of time worrying about something I only had to have a chance of having to do. So that was sort of extemporaneous, one small step.
So that's 11, and